Thank you ever so much for coming to this rather late night session. I'm very impressed that so many have turned up, but equally not surprised because it's not very often you get to hear spies talking about their work. So we're going to be talking about the covert custodians intelligence for the 21st century. And I am joined by a stellar panel. To my immediate left, I've got Kaupo Rosin, who is, as everyone will know, the head of Estonia's Foreign Intelligence Service. And then I have Nozuko Gloria Bam, who is the Director General of the State Security Agency in South Africa. And then we have to be very grateful for the gentleman on the far end of the panel, because he only found out he was doing this a couple of hours ago, because unfortunately we had a dropout. And it's Daniel Markic, who is the Director of the Intelligence and Situation Centre for the EU. So a really broad panel of experts, and they are going to, well, we're going to have a couple of opening statements, then we're going to have some questions by me. And then we'll open it up and you can all ask questions, and obviously all on the record. And yeah, if you want to sort of open up with a few words in this crazy world.
Thank you, Deborah, and thank you for this wonderful opportunity to be here and sit in front of all you. So I just start by reminding everybody what is a task for intelligence services. First, to reduce uncertainty and reduce confusion. That means provide the situation awareness picture for the decision makers. And another very important task for us is to provide early warning. And early warning is there to give decision makers decision space. And ideally, let's say the early warning provides an opportunity for politicians to avoid or take steps to avoid the predicted bad situation happening, which is very important. It is not an ideal situation where what we warn for or what we predict is actually happening then in the real world. And here we can also speak about the Ukrainian case. So there were services in the West who warned about this, and there were services who didn't believe it. And I would say some of the services who failed or who were wrong because of right reasons, maybe. But they looked only at the enemy capabilities. And the conclusion was that based on the Russian force disposition around Ukraine's borders, the operation as such is not doable. It's not executable in a military way, and it wasn't. But the Russian decision to attack was already made several months before. Regarding, let's say, regarding the relationship between policymakers and intelligence, for me it's very important to have a clear mandate from the politicians as service director, so I don't have to argue about everything every day with the politicians, and I need the politicians to trust me. And I need to be there for them. If they need me, I have to know what's on the agenda for them so I can provide all the intel they need in advance. So I need this daily interaction. In Estonian case, I think I have this. And my final short message is, I think nowadays, or in the current situation, it is not enough for the intel services just to observe and report. I think the intel services can do a lot more. We can also be more aggressive or active ourselves, conduct our own active measures. So this is a tool that the politicians or the governments have. I know the mandate is very different from country to country, but I think in Europe especially we need this mandate in more countries. In some countries it's present and the services are allowed to conduct certain activities, and other countries it's not allowed. But I think we have to be more aggressive in this world. Thank you.
Thank you. And Nozuko, do you want to say a few words?
Thank you very much, Deborah, and good evening, everyone. My name is Nozuko Bam, and I'm from South Africa. I'm actually quite happy to be here this evening, but also just participating in this conference. It's my first time, really, and I found the conference quite interesting. It provides quite a good opportunity and platform for all of us to interact, to share experiences, and usually as intelligence officers, as I can see, all of us can see right there, it says nightcap session, and it says, see overt custodians, and you start thinking, oh, it should have been covert, or perhaps it is overt after all, because the kind of work that we do from time to time requires all of us to do a bit of covert work, but also in the world in which we live in, actually, most of the information that we work on is readily available and it's out there, and therefore it becomes important to look at merging these two words, the overt and the covert word. So the platform has given us an opportunity to interact, share, look at how other countries actually conduct this important work, but not only that, look at how business interacts with the work that is traditionally seen as a work of spies, or spooks, as we would refer to them. And I'm happy to see Dr. Jacques Sellier, South African. Makes me feel quite comfortable because we read quite a lot of his work, and we do interpretation of what he writes about us as intelligence services. And that's exactly the importance of ensuring that we're able to look at what the media, what journalists say about us, what others say about us, what business says, because we're in an era where a lot of information is actually readily available out there. What becomes important is how we then interpret that information and package it so that it makes sense to the policymakers. So it's a great opportunity, and I'm hoping that with this interaction tonight, we're going to get valuable inputs through questions, I guess, but through this interaction, we'll also be able to share best experiences out there. We are a small service at home, a service that covers both your domestic collection as well as foreign intelligence. We also do signals intelligence with all its challenges, but we do, and we try to ensure that we cover quite a number of areas of interest and areas of focus that will be important for our policymakers back at home. Yes, that's who we are.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone.
And Daniel, you've obviously been sort of thrown into this last minute, so I thought I'd throw a spontaneous question at you in that spirit. We've heard from Mark Rutte, the head of NATO, about how NATO allies, given the growing threats, need to be in a war mindset. And we focus a lot on militaries and societies. But can you just give a sense of inside intelligence services in Europe that have, enjoyed the post-Cold War peace dividend? Are spies having to get back with the programme and understand existential threat, or were they always aware of that and never forgot it like everybody else?
So first of all, thank you for inviting me, and I accept it gladly because I'm convinced that intelligence and the work of the services need visibility. There is accountability towards our society, first of all, and very often we have to help our decision makers to make it clear of what exactly we do, how we do it, with what purpose, and how it can be used. But this invitation was a surprise for me. Why? Because when I took over my service in Croatia 9 years ago, I became director. It was a closed service with no communication. So we started to communicate, and it changed the image of our service, first of all. And we became actually more effective, more efficient. We had a bigger impact. So when I arrived in Brussels, there was a need for me to do intelligence 101 with a lot of people. It was not something new for me, but for them, but still there was a need for me. And one thing I told to them, I said, listen, intelligence, it's one of the tools you have. So with intelligence people, you don't have to talk to them at night. You don't have to whisper. And finally, you invite me at 10 in the evening to talk about intelligence. So when I come back to Brussels, I might have some reaction. So even if there is a lot more to do, I have to say first that people like Alpo and our colleague, they are doing a great work. And talking about our frame of mind, at least that's how I feel. With the services, we are always at war. Always. So it's not something new. Always fighting, even if there is different type of services at least in the European Union, in the member states. security services, intelligence services, hybrid services, but finally somehow always at war, always finding something. And you compare us to NATO, it's a different situation. NATO, especially since he had the intelligence reform 10 years ago, it's much more structured, the work of intelligence. But still we are doing a lot in the EU. We are using the contribution of our member state services, and they are doing more and more, and especially now in this dire time, and we hope that we'll develop it even more.
Kalpo, you sort of mentioned about the intelligence differences on the Ukraine war, where you had obviously the UK and the US saying that Russia was going to invade, and France, Germany, others saying that that was not the case. Can you just, what is the impact of that? Why does that happen, to start off with? Why do you have such different findings? And what is the impact in the intelligence world when suddenly, the services like in the UK and the US are proven in this case to be right? Does it, for example, help offset the damage from when they were very wrong during the Iraq war, for example?
Thank you very much. Let's say, question is why did it go the way it went? Again, I think there was several reasons. One is purely capability. Where do you have the right targets? Do you understand the enemy system? And you have to know where you put your resources on. The Russian system is huge, but there are very few guys who actually know what will happen, let's say, in the future. Most folks in the ministries have no clue about this. So if you target the wrong places, wrong organizations or departments or people, you feel very confident that you have good accesses and you have a good flow, but the guys or the targets do not know the information you actually need. So I think that's a big lesson learned. So you have to know the enemy first and do proper targeting before you attack, so to say. The other question is, in different countries, I have the feeling the intel folks have different access levels to their own politicians. And sometimes the politicians listen to their own services and sometimes they don't. Depends on the political agenda. And I think it played some type of role in the Ukraine pre-war situation. Because some governments had hopes, different agendas, and they didn't want to recognize what's coming. It's also pretty hard to recognize something which has not happened yet, and the indications are very few. So I think that was that were the issues.
It would be hard to forget that image of Emmanuel Macron at one end of a very long table. And just on offsetting the damage, because obviously the British and the American services did suffer a credibility problem after the Iraq war. Is that sort of ancient history now?
For me, yes, I think so. That was the moment where intelligence was a little bit politicized in some parts of the world. I hope really that it will not happen again. So we will see.
Nozaku, when we were talking just before we came on here, and you said that in South Africa, there's a lot to do with the challenges and opportunities from artificial intelligence and machine learning. Can you just talk a bit about that and how it's affecting your work?
Thank you, Deborah. In the world we live in, we're really finding ourselves having to compete at different levels, but especially when it comes to intelligence. If we don't immediately adapt to the changes that are there, we are going to find ourselves lagging behind. Artificial intelligence is there and it's a reality. Machine learning is part of that and it's there and it's our reality. And we need to start thinking on how we skill our people so that they are able to actually utilize these new capabilities. We do find ourselves in situations where we sit with a lot of information, big data, but we are unable to have time to collate this information so that we're able to produce real-time intelligence. So it becomes important that we look at other sources of information and other means that we can use that will enable us to produce real good products. Of course, whilst we know that artificial intelligence is there to help us, however, you still need to ensure you cannot leave out what we traditionally call human in terms of our work, because you still need a human being to be able to verify that information. In fact, the starting point becomes, first and foremost, where you're going to collect that data. Somebody needs to be there to actually prepare that data and make it available so that the machine is able to interpret it. So in the world we live in, where we've got those new developments, it becomes very important for intelligence organizations to start adapting to these changes. Now, as a service that is relatively small, we have to become agile enough to start looking at how we can leverage the availability of artificial intelligence and machine learning into our space. It's going to require that we change our posture. It's going to require that we get proper budget, because we do not have resources, enough resources to do this work. So it's going to require that we get politicians to be on our side, because remember, for us to get the budgets, we need the politicians. First, to appreciate that as intelligence organization, we're adding value to their work, and as we're adding value to their work, therefore they're able to provide us with the necessary resources. But in the world we live in, there is no way that we're going to be able to avoid working with this. It also requires that we start looking at even the manner in which you recruit people into our organizations. Our recruitment will have to be a little bit directed towards getting these people, or young people in particular, with the necessary skills to be able to operate in this new and changing world. So it's a new and fascinating, I guess, world. And for some of us who I always refer to ourselves as dinosaurs, needs to give way and allow a new generation to come in and take up these responsibilities and be able to learn. But we also need to ensure that even our young children are educated to appreciate that the world we are living in is taking us to a different trajectory, which means that we must then be ready to also absorb them into the world of intelligence. But it's a very new and very challenging space we are moving into.
And do you find that it makes your adversaries, it's empowering your adversaries maybe faster than you're able to sort of enjoy the benefits, especially given what you were saying about budgetary constraints and buy-in from politicians?
Indeed, it is. It is going to require more collaboration, because not all of us are going to be more or less in the same level of understanding, same resources. It's going to require that there's a lot of collaboration among ourselves as intelligence organizations. But indeed, it is quite an interesting era that we are moving into. And hence, in my opening, I was saying that we need to start really working very closely with business, because they have the means to do some of the things that we're unable to do as intelligence organization. It's a new world. We therefore need to move on with the pace of times.
And what about for your service in the EU? Like, how do you find artificial intelligence, machine learning, changing how you're dealing with threats and able to respond?
Well, those are things that we are developing, but our advantage in this case, since we depend on the member state services, we use the fruit of their work. In that sense, we are very lucky. So in this position, the only thing I regret, I don't do operation anymore, and I will not do operation if there is any question about EU intelligence doing operation. So in that sense, the question is not so important for us. We are more here to help the services for them to do more, to have a better impact in Brussels.
And Kalpa, can you just talk about, obviously, with this conference is taking place at such a dangerous time, like how important a role does your service, other intelligence services play in helping to, combat what Russia is doing in Ukraine?
maybe I first comment also on the artificial and the machine learning.
Oh, yeah, go for it. Go for it. Yeah, and please, like, pitch in. Okay,
yes.
We're feeling this is very formal, but if you pitch in, please.
I'm from Estonia, and we are a heavy cyber and IT country. So there was a time where our service invested heavily in the collection capabilities, and we still collect huge amounts of data every day from different sources. We made an audit a couple of years ago to see from our database what pieces of information have been actually touched by analysts, and we discovered that let's say there was a huge amount of data which was laying there and was never touched. So conclusion is it's absolutely not doable manually nowadays. And that was the point where we started to invest heavily on different solutions to automate data processing as much as possible, to let's say discover patterns in data we have, and so on and so on. And I think we are getting better in that. So meanwhile, we consider ourselves already as a tech organization. Different challenges still remain. How much you decentralize software development, how much you centralize, all kinds of issues. But let's say who doesn't invest in this nowadays, or hasn't invested already, it has lost totally. The world is going too fast. And the data we are getting every day, either by collection or buying or stealing it from databases, this all must go into the system. And yeah.
And can you just answer about Ukraine and how the intelligence agencies are helping to combat the war? And the threat to the rest of Europe, your country.
Well, there are different tasks I see in the Ukraine context. First, of course, is to make sure that our policymakers understand what's going on. Situation awareness part, and here we cooperate with our military intel folks heavily. We have to understand what are the Russian intentions, or what are they planning, how they see this situation, how they assess themselves are doing, how they see their own economy, and so on, because it's very important for us to have a look from inside, actually. And sometimes, very often, the enemy organizations are pretty honest if they assess what's going on in their own systems. Of course, I welcome all services who help Ukrainian war effort by different help. It can be targeting information or whatever. And here, of course, let's say another issue is then practical support on the ground to the Ukrainian services themselves. Help to develop their own capabilities, give them access to different solutions. So there is a variety of tasks which is out there for the Western services, I think.
And how does it work for South Africa? Because obviously South Africa has a different relationship with Russia and a different relationship over the whole war in Ukraine. Do you, as an intelligence chief, how do you navigate that?
It's a good question. Yes, we have relations with Russia. We're part of the BRICS countries. But for us, what becomes important in all the work that we do is always anchored on our foreign policy approach. So that's what guides us. Why would we be involved? And when we see conflicts happening all over the world, at what point do we become involved as intelligence? And what role do we play? And so whatever role that we play is always guided by our policy priority. And that policy is very simple. It talks about ensuring that we're able to create a better world, and that we're able to ensure that we get peaceful resolution of conflict. And that always is our starting point. So even with the developments between Ukraine and Russia, the developments in our continent, the conflict that we see in our continent, our approach is about that. To what extent are we able to ensure that we bring parties together and ensure that there's a conversation? So our engagement and our involvement even in the war between Ukraine and Russia was informed by that. We've been there several times. We've engaged both parties from our side as intelligence, but also as a country. Our president led the Africa mission to engage both President Zelensky as well as President Putin to look at how we can eventually get them to sit down and talk. And that's the spirit in which we look at conflicts as a starting point. So equally, when we look at matters, even in our continent, that has been our approach. You would have seen recently with the crisis that we're seeing in the DRC, the crisis that you see in the Horn of Africa. That's the approach that we adopt as intelligence. We try our best to play the role that we all know intelligence officers play behind the scenes of engaging various parties, and we do engage. We engage the services all over the world. Those that are involved and we have interests, we engage them directly with the objective of ensuring that we're able to bring parties together.
And given the instability, would you say that the environment is becoming increasingly hostile for your service to operate in?
Indeed it is. But we still have to continue to engage. You would know that with, obviously, intelligence officers, we go where no one sometimes else is able to go. And that's what guides us as South Africa. So even when we know that at a political level, our countries are unable to talk, we still have to ensure that we get involved. And we bridge that gap. And that's what we've been doing, and we continue to do it.
And from your perspective, because it's really interesting to hear your perspective, when you look and hear the language that's, the warnings that are coming out from Western allies about the direction of travel in the world with sort of, these global powers and this shifting sand and the collapse of the rules-based system, like, how do you view where things are going?
It is currently quite concerning that all over the world we are starting to see the rules-based approach changing. You are constantly seeing a pace in which decisions are taken, and intelligence has to come in later to try and fix and ensure that there's a process that's being mapped out. It's changing the whole ballgame in terms of how we work. We are used to a traditional way of engagement where we would have our foreign policy posture, we will be engaging, we'll come up with clear proposals, but that is changing. We see decisions being made, and you immediately have to make sense of what does this actual decision mean, and how we're going to ensure that we either align ourselves to whatever decision that would have been taken, and or we look at how we're going to be able to challenge it if we have to challenge. But all over, really, there's this change, a rapid change that we are seeing, where countries are no longer adhering to what we traditionally know to be a rules-based approach in terms of how we address various situations that we're confronted with out there.
I'm going to be opening up to questions in a minute, but I have one more left, if that's okay. From an EU perspective, like the EU has been pretty forward-leaning when it came to countering disinformation. Can you just sort of talk a bit about how your service helps in that fight, the information fight? Do you think that intelligence agencies should be more aggressive and should be more involved in countering disinformation, but then also winning in the information space?
So in the, I would say, EU galaxy of institutions, we have other institutions that are fighting, for example, FIMI, for example, in the US, Stratcom. Our business is a bit different. So we only do intelligence, and we use intelligence product. So the most recent thing I would say we have been working on is what is very modern to say the hybrid threat. The hybrid threat, it's, you can put a lot of things inside. So all the conventional and unconventional way that Russia might be using to hurt us, with, at the end of the day, trying to have plausible deniability. So what is important is, as a group of member states and a group of service, we have quite a clear view of what they are doing and how. So what does it include? Very often we have a tendency now to forget that there is espionage, which is extremely important, espionage. They have cyber attacks done by the Russian services, but by the Russian criminal groups, and very often together. And then we have all the list of things they have been doing, for example, in Europe, which includes sabotage, arsons, attempted murders, so you name it. We have a clear view, and our business is to give that clear view to the political leaders in the EU. And then it will be the decision to them at one moment to make things public or not, depending of the goal. We've seen that from the NATO side, it has been done. We saw that 2 weeks ago, an Assistant Secretary General of NATO went to the European Parliament and gave some facts. You have some interesting information on that. So I think that in that sense, we can use intelligence, first of all, to raise the awareness. We've been hearing over the last few days here, and I heard the Ministers of Foreign Affairs today at the main panel, saying that we need to raise the awareness of the people of the European Union, that they are not aware of what's being done by Russia and other actors against the member states. So the knowledge of our services, the common knowledge we have in that sense, can be used, and then not only we would be able to fight it, but the population of the European Union would support that.
Okay, thank you for that answer. So it's your turn now, but if you don't ask questions, I will continue to ask them. At the back there, if you wouldn't mind saying who you are if you're allowed to, and then, yeah, asking a question. Depends on the day. Oh, yeah, sorry, wait for a microphone, please.
Dean Baxendale, Optimum Publishing International from Toronto. We've recently, due to threats from Donald Trump, as part of our response is to put in a joint U.S.-Canada fentanyl money laundering task force, something that my authors have been looking at trying to put in place in Canada for many years. They've been very aware of the hybrid threats, triads, organized crime, PLA, Iran, all converging inside Canada to do various things. Hybrid warfare, you just mentioned it now. How do you see that hybrid war running out in terms of elite and sub-state capture here in Europe? And do you need stronger laws to go after politicians that may be aligning themselves up with malign foreign states like Russia, China, Iran, etc.?
Who would like to go for that one?
I can maybe comment, perhaps, on that. Well, first, I think the word hybrid is misleading and soft.
Someone made a point to me that a hybrid car is still a car.
Well, hybrid, yeah, hybrid, schmybrid. But let's say we should. It's what's happening is attacks, cyber attacks, assassination plots. Maybe in some parts it's actually state-sponsored terrorism. What is going on? You mentioned a very right point here: the mandate and legislation. Again, if I talk about Europe, it's very different by country. I feel that in Estonian case, our foreign intelligence, us, and our internal security service have a proper mandate to go after those guys, to catch them. So all the tools which are out there, we are able to use. I know it's in different European countries, it's a different level how invasive and aggressive we can be. And the second point is, if you catch those guys, and we have, in Estonian case, let's say the number between 10 and 20 saboteurs, different level, sometimes more professional, sometimes more amateurs, and I think the amateurs are most dangerous, actually, because they screw up, usually, and then something goes wrong. But the question is the law, or how long you can put those guys into the prison, and under what code. So in Estonian case, you can send people to prison first because of unviolent activity against the Estonian Republic. That would mean the information space then, or cooperation with hostile services. And it doesn't have to be espionage, or no secret information must be passed in order to have somebody convicted. So these tools we have those in our legislation, our criminal code, and those saboteurs go away for, I don't know, 4 to 5 years usually, for breaking a car window, for example, if it's done, let's say, if it's tasked by the GRU to do this. And it doesn't matter if he knows who is actually working for or not. So, and I see this is also a deterrent element already. So if you can go away for 5 years and the money you earn for this is, I don't know, less than €1,000, it's just not worth it. And we already see in our case that this deterrence has some effect already. Again, here I see in different countries in Europe, it's a totally different level. Services have different capabilities and possibilities. And the criminal code is also different. Some are more harder, some are more softer. In the current situation, my personal preference is go hard because the Russians are at war with us. And some of us are not at war with them. But weakness for Russians is only provocation for them, I think.
And how much of a challenge is it then when you've got JD Vance coming here and, sorry, had to go there, and sort of like, you know, he obviously is laying into the whole free speech thing and censorship. But like, for example, in the UK, after the Skripal poisonings, there was a huge information campaign by Russia using, you know, the sort of the gullible as well as, you know, people that were working for them in the information space. But if you adopt this, you know, understandable free speech mantra that you're hearing from the Americans, like how much of a how do you manage to navigate that when it's being used as a weapon by actual enemies? I don't know if do you want to jump?
I will not comment
It's a shame.
the words of the Vice President Vance, but I will say, for example, Romania, it's an interesting example because actually the Romanian internal services and all the institution in Romania, but SRI did exceptional work in that case after the election, you know, and that was actually, if I was asked, actually it's a good example of how we should do the job. We got the proofs, we used it, we reacted. That's the way to work.
Yeah, and clearly that was held up. I can say this because I'm just a journalist, but that was held up as an example by JD Vance of how the dire state of European democracy. So yeah, anyway, that gentleman in the front.
Thanks very much. I'm Yaki Silia from South Africa, the Institute for Security Studies. So obviously I'd like to ask Ambassador Bum a question or two. So just a bit of context. South Africa had a period of intense state capture. And as a result of that and various other incidents, there were a number of commissions of inquiry that pointed to the extensive corruption within the intelligence services, their political use for political purposes, and ongoing issues, use of security clearance for political purposes, and so on and so forth. So I just wondered what progress has been made, perhaps, but how do we make sure that that doesn't happen again? Thanks. That was my question.
All right.
Go for it.
It's a direct question. Right. No, indeed, we've had that bit of history. And indeed, there are measures to deal with those who are identified to have been involved in wrongdoing. As the accounting officer right now, I have that responsibility of ensuring that they go through the normal course of our laws. So in other words, most of them, they have been registered for proper investigations. The independent directorate, which is responsible for investigating all matters pertaining to fraud, is seized with those matters. But to be honest, now that I'm there and I'm seeing some of the things, I'm actually realizing that there would have been instances where we would have seen some of the cases as being the cases of corruption, but some of the cases would have been cases where matters could have been dealt with as part of disciplinary processes. So we're looking at how we then draw a line between matters that must go for criminal investigation and matters that need to be dealt with as part of your own internal disciplinary processes. I'm sorry that I have to do this with everyone here, because those are just matters that are internal to our work as intelligence services. But there's a lot of progress that we've made in terms of addressing the matters that were registered with us by the... I'm coming to that. So what we've also done then in the process is to look at changing our policies, retraining of our people so that they understand their mandate and they understand the responsibility that they have, aligning them to what the constitutional values are about, that we are supposed to be espousing as intelligence officers. So our focus really has been how to rebuild the capacity we have. But also part of that talks to new recruitment, people that we're recruiting to the agency. To what extent do we then ensure that they are fit for purpose? So a lot of work has been done in terms of changing our policies, changing our legislative framework, but also strengthening oversight, because perhaps that's where we had a few weaknesses in terms of our work.
Thank you. The gentleman over there with the glasses and holding his hand up.
Thank you very much. I don't want to take you to the political path in this kind of topic, but thank you very much for bringing up Romania. I'm coming from there, and I'm part of the group which is preparing the next round of election from a perspective of the regulator on DSA and telecommunication. So we have the impression in this moment that the word disinformation, it's the most hated word in Washington, D.C., unfortunately. After a series of 7, 8, 9, 10 years where we, including the first Trump administration, was a very good one, a practical one, where we had actually a race for having new capabilities to work against disinformation. This was one of the top priorities, and cyber and hybrid war. My very practical question to intel agencies is, do you think you can play an important role aside of the political heated debate in bringing up the value of FIMI, hybrid war, and showing to the top politicians that actually these things are happening? Because, for example, in my country, it seems that credibility is lost in all the institutions, no matter if you declassify top information from the National Security Council. Thank you.
Do you want to go for that?
For me, I'm a firm believer that we have to do it. I mean, I know that everything is difficult. Confidence in governments, trust has disappeared. But we have to believe in something. And I personally believe that we can always fight. We can always fight together. We should never give up. So it's especially difficult for the intelligence and security services. So first of all, and I will speak as a director, I used to be in my country, it has to be very clear. It's my personal opinion, my personal experience. You have to know right away that you will never satisfy your political leaders. They will never be satisfied. It's impossible. But you have to do your best, and you have to keep your direction. So you have to always be careful not to say what they want to hear, but you have to present the results of your work. It will be their decision to use your work or not. Personally, again, I'm a firm believer that you have intelligence to use it for action or reaction, not to have databases. But Kaupo said rightly, in our community you have different types of services, and actually in the EU, 27 member states, 27 different systems with intelligence services, security services, hybrid services, services with police authority, services with just judicial authority, services that are in the Ministry of Defense, some are in Ministry of Interior. So it's a quite interesting community, but still I'm quite convinced, especially if we work together, and that's one of my goals in my position now. I am convinced that we can get good results and we can have an impact at the political level.
Kaupo, can I just ask, just following up on that, because obviously, like, the Baltic states have been real leaders in just understanding so-called hybrid, warfare. You've been educating other countries, including the UK, on that. Do you think that because your actual population understand how information is weaponized by their enemy, in this case Russia, that they're more resilient and less vulnerable? Because obviously I see the same trends in the UK, for example, where truth is it's almost like a sideshow, and it's just about if you've got populist leaders saying something, then they can dismiss any kind of genuine intelligence-based fact as being fiction.
Well, in our case, probably we understand the Russians better than some other countries, but there are a couple of things I want to point out is that first, the Russians are not, as we see, they are not creating new problems on the ground, but they are very good in exploiting the problems which exist. So they play on people's real feelings and try to amplify those. And I think the Romanian case was something similar, amplifying some of the feelings in Romanian society. For the inter-services, the task is not to chase after narratives and then try to contradict those or kind of try to explain how it actually is. Our task is to penetrate enemy systems. The bodies who conduct these information psychological activities or information technical activities, there are organizations, there are real people behind it. So it's our task to understand who is doing what organization has what task, what is the next plan, who is that person, and go after those folks, I think.
Thank you. Gentleman at the front.
Thank you. My name is Barak Ravid. I work for Axios in the U.S., but I want to ask this question as as someone who served for 6 years in the Israeli intelligence service and still traumatized by this huge intelligence failure of October 7th, and ask you two things. First, and Kaupo, you mentioned it at the beginning about the Russian invasion, and you said that the problem was that people thought, or that intelligence services thought, that the capabilities or the build-up was not enough, so that they looked at the capability but thought it was not enough. And to me, it seemed that, like in October 7th, people did not look at the capability but looked at the intentions and interpreted intentions the way they wanted to, according to certain concepts. So I was wondering what you think about it, about the threat of the concept and the interpretation of the intentions and not the capabilities. And the second thing about using AI and machine learning, because at least from the investigations that were done since October 7th, people saw that, or the investigation, I think, found that the Israeli intelligence got addicted to AI and to intelligence and to machine learning, and therefore sort of like put away the old school intelligence.
So, Nozoku, do you want to answer the AI question, and Kaupo, do you want to answer the intent capability question?
No, certainly it's very clear that sometimes we put a lot of reliance on AI. And as I said earlier on, there's no way that you'll be able to do that. Because for one, to be able to do proper analysis, you've got to be able to use both the AI, but also your sources who are human beings who are on the ground, who are collecting this information. And for us to be able to succeed in our business, there is no way that we're going to leave that out. There's also another aspect that we constantly do not look into, and that is social media monitoring, which is plays a big role in terms of the work that we do. Of course, it has got its own challenges, but we need to ensure that we balance all these. We cannot just focus on one aspect of collection, and which in this case will be just AI. Human intelligence will always be the backbone of our work as intelligence officers, I think.
So regarding the intentions, so I see a difference here about between assessing the enemy intentions, which can be done based by indicators. That's one method, and it's probably useful to have it in place. And the other side would be knowing the intentions. I want to have the plans in my hands from the general staff. So this is and then you see what's written there, and this reduces uncertainty for me.
But in the Ukraine case.
Sorry, we're running out of time, and there's loads of other people that have got questions.
You don't think that people thought that, oh, Putin will never do it?
Yes, some countries did think that, but I think they didn't have insights into the real intentions as what decisions which were made in Russia.
Thank you. Gentleman there's been waiting patiently.
Thank you. Basel Had Jassim. In the 21st century, wars are no longer as traditional as before. Do you agree with the opinion that social media is one of the tools of wars between countries through the disclosure of specific information and the blocking other information through those who control these applications? And here, what the role of intelligence in protecting countries?
Do you want to go for that one, Daniel?
It seems to me it's a difficult question. I'm not sure I got it completely, if I may, but you know, when I think about the comment, for example, of Kaupo about hybrid, when we talk about hybrid, it's as we said, it means a lot of things, but actually it's nothing new. They have been doing that all the time, the Russian, and they have specific names, and Kaupo, you will know it better than me, that they used 50 years ago, but the idea is the same. So as technology will go further, the principle will stay the same. One of the comments, you know, when we look at the war in Ukraine, maybe what we have a tendency to forget. So we talked a lot about drones, missiles, new technology, blah, blah, blah. We have a tendency to think that it's a war on the ground with a lot of civilian casualties, with thousands. So the number of casualties on the military side daily, it's so incredible. I mean, when you hear the numbers. So actually, it's almost the First World War. So yeah, the technology is evolving. The attackers will always be one step in front of you. You will always try to catch up the attackers, but at the end of the day, it's always the same dirty business.
We have two questions at the front. The gentleman there with the very fine sort of heart.
It's about love. Thank you very much. I'm Anthony Busia. I'm the Deputy Head of the Prosecuting Authority in South Africa. So this is not my business, but I have DG Bam, you made an important point around the role of the private sector, particularly in keeping pace with technological developments. Now, we're trying to do the same thing in the Prosecuting Authority in partnering with the private sector, particularly when it comes to digital evidence. But the question I have to you is, how do you partner with the private sector and also protect the independence of the organization and the perceptions around the role of the private sector in a way that I agree you should be doing, but how can you maybe give me some examples of how you're doing that effectively? Thank you.
It's a good question. And do you mind passing it to Mikey just there? Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Mikey Hoare. I'm at advisory firm Keck CNC, and before Keck CNC I worked in UK government for 20 years, working in particular on raising visibility and understanding of intelligence and national security. For example, helping people understand in the build-up to Russia's invasion of Ukraine why we were so concerned, and trying to make the case for taking that very seriously. I'd love it if the panel could unpack a bit the point at the beginning about active measures. I think it's really interesting, you know, different agencies having different permissions, etc. But I think the parameters that agencies put around active measures, legally, ethically, practically, are a really important part of the buy-in and credibility of the intelligence world. So just be very interested in the panel's views on that.
Nozuko, do you want to go first with your question?
Right. No, thank you very much. There's a lot of work that, of course, we do as government broadly, not just as intelligence services, as government broadly, in which we partner with the private sector. And that work sometimes translates to intelligence. I'll give an example in terms of what we do back at home, where we've been involved in working with bodies such as, or companies or entities such as Eskom, in dealing with the challenges that have been affecting them. Eskom is our electricity supply company, where we would look at what are the challenges really that are affecting Eskom and making it unable for them to provide sufficient energy to South Africans. It may seem as though it's just a matter that should have been dealt with by the department responsible for energy, but it impacts on national security. And therefore it becomes important that we partner with them in looking at threats that are affecting them and how we then as an agency can actually be able to assist them in dealing with such threats. So it's a number of areas where we have to partner with the private sector in looking at threats that are affecting them. But when it comes to resourcing, because we may not necessarily have sufficient resources to do this work. Therefore, the private companies, together with intelligence, will partner in ensuring that we have sufficient resources to deal with such. But we also partner not only with companies, with universities when it comes to recruitment. You need the universities to assist you with that, with training of people. You need the universities to be able to provide that kind of support. So partnering with various institutions, including business and academic institutions, helps a lot in terms of ensuring that we are still able to do our business, even with the little resources that we actually have. Thank you.
We're slightly on the clock. Are you okay to take that question on active measures? And then we have one more question at the back.
Yes, just very shortly. For me, active measures are using non-military means in order to promote our security interests abroad, which then either delay, disrupt, stop enemy activities, or promote our goals in, let's say, actively, more or less. Okay. I tried.
Short but sweet. Thank you very much. Gentleman there.
Hello, Torsten Greening, Spacewatch Global. I would like to ask the elephant in the room question about AI. We learned we can't live without AI in the upcoming future. Full stop on that, but how far can we expect to go with that until it violates then human rights? So what do we as Germans, Europeans, global citizens have to expect from the future to come? It's an easy one to finish up.
Thank you. Who would like to go for that one? Don't all jump at once. Okay, I'm going to pick Daniel. You've been quiet for a while.
Thank you. I'm even more surprised with this than with the late invitation. I am not sure how. I understand, there is an issue. We understand the need to protect human rights. But again, we have to do our job, But what I want to say is, when I used to go in my national parliament to talk about our work, and some questions were being asked about the tools we're using, and one time I told them if the enemy was still using the telegraph, we would just have, be hooked on it, and that was it. As the technology evolves, we have to use similar means to be able to defend ourselves. And that's why the question in the regulation in the EU, it's very important of the data that have to be kept. We have to have the tools to fight the enemies, because we are seeing, and I hope it is clear to everyone, so Russia, it's attacking in a kinetic way Ukraine, but it's challenging our countries in different ways. There is other actors, other state actors that wants to fight us. Don't forget, I would say almost the classical threats as terrorism, because terrorism now, we don't talk much about it, but the threat exists clearly. So we have to have and to use the tools to fight it.
Okay, well, on that note, thank you so much. If everyone would just say thank you to our panel for a really fascinating discussion.
As chairman of the conference, let me thank this panel, a very, to a certain degree, technical questions, but I'm really amazed that at this time, Saturday night, 11 o'clock, there are so many people here. This, I think, also pays tribute to the quality of the members here on the podium, but also to the conference as such. I think that even a subject like this has so much, gets so much attention, which is a very important subject. So I thank all of you for participating in it, even on short notice. And I would like to thank all of you for coming to the public square. This is a last public square we have during this conference. And I would like also to thank the team of the Munich Security Conference that makes this possible around the clock, setting this up and organizing it and seeing to it that everybody get a place here. And I would like you to give a round of applause to the podium, but also to the MSC team. So enjoy the evening. There's still a soccer cup in the Literatur Café, and I think there are some bars open, so enjoy the night. And tomorrow morning we start at 6 o'clock. No, it's a joke. Thank you.
Thank you.